In the digital reality, evolution over revolution prevails. The QA approaches and techniques that worked yesterday will fail you tomorrow. So free your mind. The automation cyborg has been sent back in time. TED speaker Jonathon Wright's mission is to help you save the future from bad software.
Welcome to the show. We've got Damian. I'm so excited to have him on the show. I've been addicted to going and watching some of your videos recently on YouTube, which you have to check out. His lightning talk at Star West was just absolutely amazing. He gets the crowd going. Over 100 conferences he's done. This guy is an absolute legend. And also, he's going to tell you a little bit more about Ineffable and what Ineffable Solutions does. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Damian. Give us a little bit of introduction to yourself.
Thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. It's great to be here. And thanks for the introduction. It's all accurate. I'm a public speaker. I'm a professional speaker. This is my job. This is what I do. I've been doing it professionally for about 6 years, and I've had my company for almost 4 years now. So that's who I am right now. I'm a speaker, among other things. But I started my career almost 26 years ago in software testing. And that's why I'm speaking to you today, among other things.
Yeah, I was very impressed. I kind of looked through all the way back to the 90s when you started off in testing. And, you've had some really interesting roles. You've kind of gone between kind of real focus on quality, to kind of team leadership. And I kind of spotted that from some of this kind of stuff that you do with your training sessions at the moment, because that looks like a lot of fun. And some of the feedback I was reading, you really get the audience engaged, and, you're working on things like communication, teamwork. Tell me a little bit about how you got into doing the training side of things.
Yeah, I'll start even further back to give you a little bit of context and origin story, as it were. I started in computers in my teenage years. I started learning on a TRS-80 color computer, and I taught myself BASIC when I was just in primary school. So I've been around computers my entire life, and by 19 years old, I was at university, and I had an opportunity. A friend of the family gave an opportunity to join the quality assurance department at CompuServe, a company that's no longer around, but used to be the one and only way to get online in the late 80s and early 90s. And so I dropped out of university and joined the QA department and started my testing career. As many of us have fallen backwards into testing. That's my fall backwards story. And to make a long story short, over the next 25 years or so, I worked at about 15 different companies in a variety of contexts and industries and domains, including education and retail, finance, insurance, airline, all sorts of different companies that had many differences, but one thing in common: they all made or used software in some way, shape, or form, and I helped make that software better through testing. And then I got into improv about 12 years ago, improv comedy, kind of like what you see on Whose Line Is It Anyway? And I did that for about 10 years. I teach that. I recently taught a class at the Ohio State School for the Blind. I taught a bunch of visually impaired students how to do improv. I used that experience to help me author and illustrate a children's book called Hank and Stella and Something from Nothing that teaches kids the principles of improvisational comedy. I really see myself as a holistic person, using a lot of different varied aspects of myself and bringing them all together to become a public speaker, as I mentioned before. And I use elements of my testing experience and my improvisation and my authoring to try and make dynamic, enjoyable educational sessions, keynotes, workshops for my attendees.
It's absolutely fascinating, because I went through, because you've also spoke at a dog fest, I think it was, or cat fest. There was some really interesting events that you've spoken at, and I noticed there's a few schools in there, and I was thinking it's so great that you kind of, I guess a lot of people are talking about STEM at the moment, but no one's really thinking about those kind of soft creative skills. And I think creativity is so important. And, it seems like you're just directly tapped into that. I know, James Whittaker did a few books on 5 steps towards creativity. It sounds like you're kind of very aligned with that, and I'm very passionate about, how important communication is.
Absolutely. I think communication is one of the most essential skills that needs to be developed. And I do enjoy speaking at primary schools, elementary schools here in the States. I go and I read my book, and the book is intended to teach kids life skills through improv. You can teach a kid about collaboration and cooperation and creativity and how to communicate and react to mistakes and accidents, but that's kind of dull and boring. But if you wrap up those boring lessons in something more fun, then it becomes more palatable to them. And so some of the same things I teach in my workshops to professional executives, I teach those same ideas and concepts to children, just using different language. But I think it's very important to focus on things like communication and empathy and linguistics and semantics. What do things mean, and understanding one another, modeling, all these sorts of relativism, those types of things, really fundamental concepts. That's one of the things I realized after 25 years of software testing, is no matter how much the context changes, if you dig down deep enough, at the core are usually just a handful of fundamental things like communication and empathy, trust, relationships, those types of things. And that's what I focus on in my speaking and training now.
No, I think it's great because, trust is the basis. When you're talking about confidence around testing, there's a certain level of trust that's kind of implied there. And, back onto your point for a second, I don't know if you've ever seen the TED talk from Sir Ken Robinson around, is education killing creativity? I'd recommend checking it out. He's a fantastic speaker, and he's kind of talking about what you're talking about here, about what are those kind of skills that the kids are going to need in the future, and those core foundational skills. Yes, science, maths, technology is great, but in actual fact, we don't know what the future is going to look like in 10, 20 years. And we're finding right today, I know you say in this first bit of work, you've kind of had to interact with people that's, since COVID-19, part of that is that kind of communication might be the norm going forwards. And therefore, being able to express yourself, be able to read people and be able to understand and empathize for them, and, have that curiosity and enthusiasm and passion about what you're doing. I think that's what you're trying to do, is inject that passion back into it with a bit of fun as well. So you were talking about the kind of training side of things. And I know you do things like the hidden requirements and a few other sessions. Could you tell us a little bit about the listeners, a little bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. I like to vary up my training. Some of it is improv based. In other words, I teach these things that I mentioned earlier, linguistics and semantics and communication and empathy, which are somewhat dry, boring topics, but I try to wrap them up in something more fun, because something that's more enjoyable, people will, whether they need it or not, they will want it, something to learn something. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I try and make it interesting to them. So I often use improv as a way to teach these fundamental topics, but not all of my talks and training use improv. Sometimes I'm able to wrap it up in other ways to make it interesting, to engage the audience. The hidden requirements is one of my talks and workshops that does not use improv, but I talk about the importance of emotional considerations in software design, development, and testing. If something meets specifications or requirements, or seems to be as intended, it may still not be pleasing and satisfying and enjoyable to the customer. And why is that? Because pleasing, satisfying, enjoyable are emotions. And if you haven't considered the emotions, then even if it meets requirements, it may not sell. It may be rejected by the customer. So that one, I don't really use any improv in it, but I tap into the idea of emotional considerations and the importance of those.
And that's really interesting, because another TED speaker, Simon, I'll dig his name out. I don't know if you've ever seen. He explains with a whiteboard why people like Apple products, and it's kind of that whole kind of dimension of feelings.
Simon Sinek, perhaps.
Yeah, Simon Sinek. Yeah, and
he's the why circle, the golden why. Start with the why.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
I truly believe that the idea that he's espousing there, start with the why, is nothing new, but he does it very clearly and effectively. So it's gotten a lot of popularity. And the idea, I totally agree with it. I often say, if you understand the purpose, the reason, the goal that you do something, if you answer the why, that will help you better understand the what and the how. If you try and figure out what you're doing or how to do it, but you don't understand the reason, then I think you're lost. So I totally agree with that message.
It is, and it's amazing because looking at it a different direction, and someone like Steve Jobs was very much about the why. It was, it wasn't, this has got an 8086 processor in. It was about, twice as fast as it was before, or, twice as, shiny as it was before. And, part of it is it was feeding directly into our emotions. And I know, I remember a friend, Julie Gardner, who did emotional intelligence for testing. She used to do the workshops at Star. And, do you feel that maybe some of that stuff's kind of ticking into, getting people thinking about mindfulness, people thinking about emotional intelligence? Do you think that's also very helpful, or?
Well, I was listening to the QALead introduction episode where you introduced the new series, the new podcast, and one of the quotes that I heard you say was, "Testing is a lost art." And I agree, because I think that a lot of times, after being in this for 25 plus years in software testing and technology, and being a consumer, a user of technology for 46 years, my entire life, my personal feeling is that the quality of software has degraded significantly. The stuff that's available out there is far more complex and complicated and advanced than it ever was before, but I also feel it's worse. Now, obviously, that's subjective, and quality is very much to each their own. But that's my personal feeling. And part of that is because I think that testing is a lot of lost art. It's not the only reason, but part of the reason that I feel there's a degradation in the quality of software is because people have gone away from the fundamental concepts, the things that I teach, and they've gotten distracted and caught up in the fancy technology and tools that are certainly useful, certainly helpful. But again, if you don't understand the why are you testing, why, the reason that you're trying to do something, then the amount of tools and technology is really moot. It doesn't matter what type of tools and technologies you use if you don't understand the fundamental concepts such as communication and emotions. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think it's at least tangential to the topic.
No, it absolutely is, and I completely agree with you. I think we've lost something, and it's a real shame because I'm trying to get Tom Gilb on the show at the moment, and he's kind of, to me, is that the grandfather of Agile. He was talking about Planguage and Evo back in the 70s and 80s, and I've got most of his books. And he was an engineer, at heart. And, part of it feels like we might have lost some of that. And, I don't think engineering was about process. It was about this, it being an art form. It was about this, doing something that was engineered to perfection. And, I think we've kind of gone faster and faster and faster. And I think that now we're seeing it break. We're seeing it now. Like I can't use my app to order the takeaway anymore because it's gone down. I can't order food at 6 a.m. in the morning. I get up and I'm in a queue for 14,000 people, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me anymore, right? Now, I remember CompuServe. I used to have my first CompuServe email, and I also, a little side task, but I also got banned from CompuServe. And this was, back in the 90s. I know. And, back then, my best friend, who was lucky, he was called Russell Watson, but he actually got his doctorate in computers, so he became Dr. Watson, which I'm sure you're familiar with, especially with, I noticed when you were at CompuServe, you're doing MS Test, which is a very long time ago.
Not many people recognize that name, yes.
No, they don't. I don't even think the people at Microsoft recognize that name anymore. And I'm talking, I've been chatting to Alan Page and some of the Microsoft guys recently, and, they go back a few decades. But yeah, so I'd left Russ, who was my best friend, to get online. So waiting for the my 56k Flex or whatever it was, modem to connect. Got onto CompuServe, and first thing, he's onto the chat channels. He's chatting away, and yeah. So next thing, he comes downstairs. He's like, "Oh, we've been disconnected. It says you've been banned." And I said, "Oh, what's happened?" He was like, "Well, I was just chatting to people," because he was always in charge because he'd done a Mavis Beacon touch typing course. And he was able to do 80 words per minute. So therefore, because it was costing us 50 cents every minute to be online, he was the most efficient way to get connected, get on, get off in 12 minutes, and minimize the phone bill. So literally, I was like, "Well, what did you say?" He's like, "Well, this guy started, harassing me." And so I told him exactly what I thought of him. I was like, "What was his name?" He was like, "Oh, a guy called Admin." And, even though he was doing computing, he thought the name was lame, but he didn't realize it stood for administrator. And my dad got a letter through the post from CompuServe saying that his subscription's been held for abusing staff for 30 days. So
snail mail banning. That's wonderful.
But it shows you that how things have changed is, we'd get on, we'd serve ourselves like CompuServe, serve the internet to ourselves in a small chunk, and then we'd get off. And the whole thing was that experience was easy. It was straightforward for somebody who was, 16, 17 doing college. And, AOL, my sister still has an AOL email address. It's getting quite tragic, but part of it worked, right? And now we have this self-serve of always being connected and always, expecting, things to be very simple, which they're not, because what the simplicity's done is mask the actual complexity behind it. And that's the problem. And, if you remember Napster and MP3 players, how difficult was it to get music onto your MP3 player? You'd have to plug it in. You'd have to synchronize it. You'd have to download the music before that you wanted to do. It took time and it took engineering. Now you say, "Alexa, play me whatever." And if, that's it, you don't think anything else about it. And I think those simplicity has made it easier from a digital experience. But I think now it's taken away the joy of owning an MP3 player, of, going through and really thinking about, well, what's my favorite music? I'm going to rate it 1 to 5. I'm going to make my own playlist. I'm going to make my own tapes or mixtapes. If Guardians of the Galaxy teaches us anything. But so, I think as things have gone, down the line, we've kind of out-engineered ourselves by just technology. And like you said, the focus has been, again, just on technology and not what's behind it and what purpose.
I have two thoughts on that. Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with what you said. I sometimes mentor junior or even experienced testers, depending on their need or their wants. And someone came to me once and asked if I could mentor them. They wanted to get into software testing. So I started with the why. Why do you want to? And there's no wrong answer. They could have said money or status or fame or who knows. But understanding their reason and purpose for doing so helped me better understand what to do and how to do it. So they gave their reason, and we began our sessions, and we would meet several times a week, and we started meeting over several months. And I started with things like communication, which is, again, very basic and fundamental, and effective communication, and how to identify miscommunication, how to even recognize when miscommunication might be occurring and stop it before it gets any further. And then we talked about semantics and digging into meaning and what do people mean, and words and linguistics, and how they're malleable and changed and subjective, and people's experience in Virginia Satir's communication models. And then we started talking about relativism, which led to perspective and subjectivity, and how different things mean different things to different people. And then we got into modeling, and how everything you think, do, or say is based on some type of mental model or physical model, and how that affects our perception of the world. And after months of this, she said, "Hey, I asked you to help me get into software testing, and we've never talked about it at all." And I said, "Well, have we or haven't we?" And I used the analogy of Karate Kid, if you've ever seen that movie. It's a pop culture reference, but
wax on, wax off.
That's it. He didn't think he was learning karate by doing Mr. Miyagi's household chores, but in fact he was learning it all along. So I said, "You don't think you've been learning about testing, but have we ever spoken about bug reports or defects?" She said, "No." I said, "So somebody might teach you about severities and priorities and expected results and steps to reproduce, but we've never talked about those things. But tell me, how would you enter?" We've talked about problems and perspective. How would you enter a bug? If you found a bug, how would you tell people about it? She says, "Well, I understand that I'm not sure who's going to be reading the report, so I have to try and use language that's as accessible as possible because it might land upon different eyes, and they have different perspectives, and I have to also indicate what perspective I'm using and why I think it's important and why I think it's relevant, and also use it in comparison, why it's important to compare to other things. And I said, you've just talked about, she would explain what she did and why she did those things and the results that she thought should happen and the results that actually happened. I said, what you've just done is described a beautiful bug report, but we've never talked about severities and priorities and steps to reproduce, but you knew to do those things because I taught you the fundamental concepts. So I was teaching her testing from the inside out. Back to the lost art thing, I was asked recently about what do you think is the future of testing? And many other people that were asked the same question were saying AI, ML, and DevOps, Bitcoin buzzword insert here, whatever. And I said a return to the fundamentals because that's what I think needs to be. Maybe it won't be, but I think needs to be the future of testing. And one last thing, talking about the internet and Napster and Alexa, I think obviously the internet is wonderful for a variety of reasons. And I also think it's horrible for a variety of reasons. I have a blog post called How Do You Really Feel? And it applies that concept to pizza, that you can love and hate things about a pizza. It's the same pizza, and you don't have to wholly love it or wholly hate it. You can like and dislike different aspects of it. And that's how I feel about the internet. I feel that it has made it more easy to do things badly, to miscommunicate. Now, obviously, you and I are talking across the pond very easily and effectively, but if you don't understand basic communication skills and how to identify miscommunication and stop it before it gets further, then the internet only makes it easier to miscommunicate. And I think that oftentimes that's what contributes to problems and helps them spiral out of control. Like this global pandemic right now, there's so much information out there and noise and it's very difficult to be able to distinguish what's real and not real. It's very difficult for me as somebody that is self-taught and trained in this. I can't imagine for the layperson how they're able to understand and comprehend something as important as the COVID-19 virus and truth and opinion and misinformation. And the internet helps all that happen faster than ever. So I think that this is all related to what you're speaking to.
I think it is. And I can't agree with you more. I do think testing, Paul Gerard, I remember, he just lives just up the road from me, and Paul did an interview.
Say hello to him.
I will do. For the BBC, he did one that said testing's dead. And I think what he was talking about was exactly this. He was talking about the art of testing is dead, right? And I know, James Whittaker and I saw James talk, he was talking about, testing's dead, right? And he wasn't talking about the fact that testing is dead. He was talking about in its form that it is, and the lack of creativity, the lack of all that stuff. His example with the FBI, which is, when he started there, they asked for a test plan. They wanted 100 test plans. He decided to make the test plans, instead of them 100 pages long, making them to 1 page to save time, and then to nothing because they were irrelevant, right? But the whole point was there was value in that. There was value in the bug reports. And exactly what you've just said is, I'm so disappointed. When I started in the 90s, I started for an engineering company, Siemens, who engineered things. They made nuclear reactors and health, equipment and all this kind of stuff, which was built to last. And I'd meet people who would say, yeah, I was on the committee to help with this, voice over IP silent suppression algorithm. And this is how I developed it with this group of people who all came together to work on the algo. It was all that kind of, professional kind of bodies. I ran last week, I did the BCS with Lisa Crispin. And, part of it was, bring some of that back. Well, what I see is when I turn up, and I'm sure you see this as well, is I see a bug report, which is literally one line, and it's using the title, and it'll always be set to the medium priority, and whatever other, columns, the default book tracking application, maybe a screenshot, right? And then some people will go either one step more and say, well, actually, if it's in Sprint, don't raise bugs, just come over to me, tap me on the shoulder and say, yeah, that's that. So there's lots of learnings that I just don't think happen, right? We're in this kind of economy with throwaway, people will go, wait a second, let me just go into GitHub and pull down some code, which somebody else has written, which I don't understand, and plug that in, because that's the first thing that comes up in Google. I personally, can't deal with Google. And if I do, I literally put a filter on that says, give me the information that's only a week relevant, right? I don't want to see stuff in the past. I remember typing in automation and getting automation snake oil, which, no offense to Michael Bolton and the gang, but, that was written 30 years ago, and it isn't as relevant as maybe some the latest findings, from, what's been published out there and some of the great thoughts. And like exactly what you said with COVID-19, the first bit of information I shared around that was the Stanford University medical presentation, which was very chunky and hard to eat, but it was 80 pages of really useful advice based on fact. And that was the first bit of information I'd listened about it about it, because, fake news and, there's just the information there. It needs validating in its own sense. I just think our people, the generation that are coming in, becoming testers, for whatever reason are they genuinely passionate about it? And are they just going and grabbing something and saying, I've been told to write tests or run tests or write bugs? Is that testing? And I agree, it probably isn't testing, and we need to go back to basics.
I'm trying to fight the good fight and support the former rather than the latter, trying to make people passionate about problem solving, about pleasing, about developing relationships. And you say, well, those aren't testing. Those are testing. Those are things. If you're passionate about those things, that can easily lead to a career in software testing that is more meaningful, in my opinion. And that's why I think that everyone is a tester. Now, that's missing a very important modifier, an adjective in front. Is everyone a good tester? No. But everyone is a tester. You give a child a toy, and they experiment. They push and pull and prod and turn and twist, and they notice things about it. And from those things that they observe and their experience, they alter their behavior, and they try something else, and it informs their next action. I notice when I push this, that this light goes on. I wonder what happens if I push that. Oh, the light didn't go on. Well, they're learning things. That is testing. And as children, that comes natural to them. They're all experimenters. So I think that in that sense, everyone is a tester, but you can enhance those skills. You can make them better. I have a blog post called Professional Trier. I consider myself someone that has advanced skills in trying. And I think that oftentimes as kids get into educational systems, and they're taught rote memorization of facts and figures, it deadens their creativity, and it deadens all the things that came natural to them as a child, which is why I wrote books like I do, why I go to schools and I try and get kids excited about collaboration and creativity and using their mind to solve problems and diversity and all those types of things, so that they get excited and they'll carry those up. Because it's very hard, another old idiom that carries the kernel of truth, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. Not impossible, but it's very difficult to teach someone that is set in their ways and have many cognitive biases and is greatly affected by social norms, to teach them to change. But if you have those basic fundamental things instilled at a young age and they're strengthened and you're passionate about them, I think it can lead to a lot of great things, including passionate testers.
And I think you've just raised a really interesting point. And we had Adam Smith in, who sits on the ISO committee for AI standards. It just went live this week. And he talks about cognitive bias. And I think it's really interesting, because skipping ahead, forgetting all the standard stuff we know about it, the developers that are writing and teaching the system at the moment and training it, do they have the right amount of communications and skills and empathy and all this kind of stuff that you're talking about to program an AI? Are we going to get the most dull AI, boring, uninteresting, uninspiring, products out of this kind of tribe of just, get it out quick, get it out dirty, and, do what everybody else is doing. Do it this Spotify model. Do it, whatever Google are doing. We'll do it whatever Facebook are doing. Not let's put the passion in and let's make something that's incredible. And, I see that from every app that I downloaded. I hate apps. We had Theo, I think he was the second in the series. And Theo had a quote when about 5 years ago, said there'll be no more apps, right? Same as James said, something similar the 10 years before that. And, because an app expects everyone to behave with that app in the exact same way. It's not mass customized. It's not tailored to you. It doesn't work in a different way because it gets to know you. And I ordered a robot, an AI robot, which comes on Monday, which I will have to get on the show. And it was a startup company, a Kickstarter thing from an Amazon subsidiary. It's a thing called Vector, I think it's called. It walks around, it interacts with you, it learns about you, and it learns around its surroundings. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is, those observational skills, those challenging the model. And I think all the best inventions that are coming through are people going, well, why does this have to be like this? Why does this, system have to be like that? Let's rip it all apart, start again, and, rediscover reasons why bad architecture. I had a friend who always used to say he could look at a website and go, that company started in 1990. That started in 2010. Just by that's 3-tier. This is, every good architectural decision through the age meant that that's what they were living with. No one got to a point and just deleted it all and started again. I think what you're talking about is something really special. I think those skills, to give people that kind of foundation that actually gets them to question things with integrity and put integrity back into the industry is fantastic. Are you thinking about doing maybe some workshops online while you've got some downtime, or?
Well, as I said, for the past 3 weeks, I've been pretty family focused. It has crossed my mind. I haven't taken any action. I've been approached by one person that I will be doing a webinar, an upcoming webinar. So one of my talks that it's going to be actually a very interesting experience, because this particular talk is called More Than That. And it's about how all of us are more than that, the that being whatever label you happen to put on yourself. You're more than just a podcaster. You're more than a tester. You're more than a man. You're more than all of those things. You're all of those things plus more. You're a very holistic human being. And that's kind of the gist of this talk. It's about self-identity and what you see when you look in the mirror. That talk has it has some improv in it. It has some crowd work where I interview people from the audience and take their answers and roll them into the content of the talk. There's a lot of interaction. So doing it as a webinar, unidirectional, without any feedback, without it being able to read faces and body language, it's going to be a very interesting experience. And I've been trying to think how many of my other talks and training will be suitable for unidirectional, faceless type of webinars, or if I'm going to have to develop new content. So I'm not sure what the future holds. Perhaps things will go back. I don't think they'll ever go back to normal, whatever that means, but there will be some new normal. And I'll probably have to adjust to get in line with that, but I'm not sure what that looks like right now.
Well, I definitely recommend. We were trying to do this for the BCS with Lisa. We did use a product called Slido, SLI.do. And it's a collaboration tool that allows people to ask questions, but more importantly, just things like cloud words. It visualizes it. So as they're bringing up topics, it becomes more interactive. And so as people give feedback, you're seeing these cloud bubbles of people kind of going passion, focus, learning the basics, and it gets everyone involved and they all want to be part of it. And I think that's what we need. Webinars are something of the past. I think for just one-way communication, it has to be connected to people, but then how do you connect? It's so difficult. But I also going to recommend a good friend of mine who's based out in Portland, a guy called Ray Arel. You may have come across him.
I know Ray, yes.
Yeah. He's doing.
I've been on his podcast.
There you go. So so he does the Agile Alliance podcast, and he does some really interesting stuff around the solutions-based thinking and heuristics, which is kind of what you're doing. A lot of synergy in what you guys do. But yeah, I'll drop you in both an email. I know he's enjoying isolation. He's just put together the latest Lego thing. So I've decided to take on a bigger Lego project just to kind of even it out a little bit. But you've got to keep that fun, you've got to keep that happiness going. But I also it's definitely time for people to reach out to people like yourself and start kind of interacting and learning and using this time to really start a connection. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, and tell us a little bit more about Ineffable Solutions and how that works for people who might want to get engaged.
Certainly. I believe I'm in it. the reason. Start with the why. Why do I do what I do? First and foremost, there's many reasons, but the first and foremost reason is to help improve the world, to make the world a better place, to help improve people and thereby improve the world. So that's why I do what I do. And as evidence, I gave up a lot of money from my 9-to-5 job that I had for 25 years to do something that makes considerably less money, but is meaningful in different ways. It lets me sleep well at night because I think I'm helping to make people and the world better. But that means that I speak a lot. I go to conferences and conventions and events to help people, but also to be visible, to help build some credibility, to help build a portfolio. That visibility, I hand out cards, people see me, and I call it be seen and be excellent. If I'm not seen, then no one knows I exist. But if I'm seen and I stink, then nobody's going to want what I have to offer. So I have to be seen and be excellent. So I try and do my best job. I put a lot of time and effort into my presentations, talks, and workshops. And oftentimes that leads to corporate training or private events where people will say, I really enjoyed seeing you at this event. Come and do a private workshop, several-day workshop. And then sometimes that will even lead to consulting, where I'll do short-term temporary gigs that help people expand and go deeper on the topics, which are very deep. Relativism, talking about that in an hour. How much can you get? Communication. So I help companies go deeper. The starting point for all of those things I've mentioned is ineffable-solutions.com. That's my website, and there's contact information. I also believe in giving away my stuff for free. So there's links to YouTube videos of all of my talks and training that you can watch to get a taste, or more than just a taste, to get the content itself. And if you feel it's worthwhile for your audience, then you can reach out to me through the contact page. I also have a widget that makes it easy for people to set up and book my time, that they can just reach out and grab a spot on my calendar. Another thing I mentioned earlier was my children's book, Hank and Stella and Something from Nothing, that teaches kids life skills through improv comedy. You can read the entire book for free at hankandstellabooks.com. And right before the epidemic, I was working on the second book in the series. The working title is Hank and Stella in Another Way to Know, and it's teaching kids about problem solving and the scientific method without using those big terms, teaching kids how to think for themselves, how to explore and understand and learn, rather than asking an adult or reading what somebody else wrote in a book, how to discover for themselves, using the same little characters of Hank and Stella, the dog and the bunny. So that's something I've been working on recently, and those are my two main passions right now. The third way that people might get a hold of me is I help run a conference, a yearly testing conference called QALead the Highway. We just slipped it in under the wire in late February this year before things went south, but that's at QALeadthehighway.com. You can see all the past presentations and learn a lot about the conference there. So those are three ways that you can reach out to me and contact me.
Well, it has been an ineffable event, just connecting with you, and I'm already feeling more psyched about everything. So definitely go and check out that stuff. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. We'll have to get you back, especially once you've got the book, and also to see how you've done with coaching, mentoring, and just being awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.